that's good. That
You
was
sent it to me on email, but I wanted on text. Thanks. My mom's 82nd birthday yesterday.
wow.
She's not here.
Yeah, I saw your post there.
No, and my buddy's trying to make it.
So I'd like to call to order this Development and Planning Services Committee meeting of Tuesday, August the 7th, 2018. Do we have any additions or any changes to the agenda, Administrator?
None from staff, Your Worship.
Councillor Lavery? Oh, I thought you had your hand up.
Yeah, I did it.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead and talk.
I wait for the red light. Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I just wondered if it's a little unusual, but we have very few meetings until full council meetings until UBCM. I think there've probably been some updates to be had, so I'd like us, I guess it'd be a universal decision or unanimous decision here, but if we could get an update on the state of our Fire Smart discussions, I would appreciate that.
Okay. Are we ready?
From our First Nations liaisons.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
We can do that today. I was going to plan for next Monday, but because you are asking for it today, that's no problem.
Thank you.
Okay.
It'll be a verbal report.
Okay, thank you. And do we have anything further from council? Hearing none, do we have any declaration of interest? Hearing none, Administrator?
Your Worship, under staff reports, item 5.1 is development permit 420 for the property at 791 5th Street Southeast. And I have a motion moved by Councillor Flynn, seconded by Councillor Jameson, that the Development and Planning Services Committee recommends to Council that DP 420 be authorized for issuance for Lot 5, Plan 5725, in accordance with the drawings dated June 5th, 2018, and attached as Appendix 6 of the staff report dated July 30th, 2018, and that DP 420 include the following variants to zoning bylaw 2303, reduce the west exterior side parcel line adjacent to an access route from 2 to 0.4 meters for a portion of units 7 and 8 in accordance with the drawings received June 5th, 2018. And further, that issuance of DP 420 be withheld subject to receipt of a letter of credit in the amount of 125% of a landscaper's estimate for landscaping.
Development Services, welcome back.
Thanks,
We
Your
missed
Worship.
you.
Thank you. The property is located on 5th Street Southeast on the west side as it gets near 10th Avenue. And the property's been under council's review this year when it was rezoned from R1 to R4, medium density residential. And the proposed development plan includes 8 units. Being zoned R4 could actually accommodate up to 11 units, but it's been scaled down to allow for some breathing room on the site. And I know you're all quite familiar with the property. It's been discussed many times. The application has gone through the process, staff's review, and review by the design review panel. And what's being proposed is a contemporary style development consisting of 4 buildings, and each building is a duplex, so 8 units total. And the variance being requested has to do with these 2 buildings, 7 and 8, on the site plan. And the variance request is to locate these buildings 0.4 meters from the access route, whereas the R4 zone requires a 2-meter setback from the internal access route. All the perimeter setbacks proposed adhere to the R4 zone. And as far as the design goes, it's consistent with the development permit guidelines for residential areas. And if you look at these elevations, I do have large drawings up here with me if anybody wants to look at them after the meeting, if these are too difficult to read in your package. But there's a lot of detail in the drawings. They're very well done. And the buildings resemble those that were proposed up behind the new Askew's Uptown somewhat. And they're modern looking. There's a combination of building materials. There's metal, there's wood. and nice looking. As far as the landscaping plan goes, there's over 200 shrubs proposed to be planted, 15 different species of shrubs, 4 trees, pin oak trees around the site. Here, 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 and here. And what else can I say about this? Oh, fencing is proposed along the north property line and the eastern property lines. And I understand that the owner applicant, the Reimer brothers, have been working with the neighbor directly to the south. This neighbor is actually using the Reimers' property to access their property. And so over the last year, there's been back and forth between the two property owners on how best to design this development. So I trust that the Reimers have come to an agreement with the neighbors. That's pretty much a summary overview, and staff support the proposal.
Thank you. Would the applicant like to speak? Or his representative, or their representative? Do you just want to?
Mark Lamberton, I'm at 2751 Fifth Avenue Northeast, and I'm the architectural consultant. I think as Kevin maybe just suggested, you guys are fairly familiar with, well, particularly the site plan at this point, which from the most recent rezoning application hasn't really changed. It's just been refined a little bit. As Kevin just mentioned, there is the one internal variance that we're seeking in order to just give the proper widths of units as well as provide the parking and garages for the units. There's essentially a portion of one unit that has the most significant setback. The other one is just it's more minor. So because of the way it cuts across there on the angle. So that was really the only issue that was identified as we went through the design process. So yeah, I won't speak too much more about the site plan. You'll see the landscape plan was provided by Eric Bernard. The design of the units, again, as Kevin mentioned, and is explained in the design rationale, is more contemporary, fully flat roof design. Each unit has a garage, and there's a combination of walk-ups and walk-out basement situations, and allows us to provide a variety of floor plan types, which we hope and feel will appeal to different parts of the market potentially. So yeah, so that unit right there, for instance, would be a walk-up type unit. So yeah, I don't think I'll say too much more, but we'll be happy to answer questions.
Do we have any questions for the applicant? Councillor Harrison?
Good morning, Mark. Thank you, first of all, for bringing forward the application with no external variations on the property. It makes it easier for us, I think. Can we just look at the one map that just shows the internal variance that's been asked for? And I don't have any difficulties with it, but I just want to understand it. So you don't anticipate any difficulty with for units 7 and 8 backing out onto the roadway or onto their driveway there? That movement's going to work as far as you can see?
As far as we can see, like the garages themselves, I think more or less respect that setback. It's just a portion of the sort of living quarters there. Yeah, exactly right there. So that space there. So it'll be a matter of like driving and parking shouldn't be an issue. It'll just be an awareness. I think some of that clearance is required to just make circulation a little easier on those internal roads. Certainly plenty that don't have those setbacks, but we don't anticipate anything.
Okay, and I see the fire department didn't have any concerns either, so that's positive. Can I just ask you about snow removal? Like, where's the snow going to go?
Yeah, I snow event, and there's been some clearing of the access route. For major snow events, though, I think like many developments, they'll have to be trucked away, or it'll be a strata issue. But I think in the landscape plan, though, we did try to accommodate. I think it's the only place on site that it could be accommodated would be at the very end of the discount.
Okay, so you do anticipate that the strata may have to move snow if it's a big snow event?
Extra parking or spaces. You do see that in larger parking lots where a number of stalls are taken up. But in this case, there's a bit of room at the end there, and then we'll still have to be removed when there's larger snowfalls.
Okay, thank you. Just one other question, the fencing on the north side, which I think is an important piece. Is there can you share with us just materials and height and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, it would likely be a 6-foot fence up to as close as you can get to your frontage. The two fence types, and we're looking at a couple of options. One will either be a fairly standard kind of wood panel fence, but finished so it will endure the weather. There's another option, but you'll have to sort of see how it works with the budget, where it uses metal, so it'll be metal clad, a little bit like the metal that we use on the units. But we want to make sure that the details of that fencing type are appealing. When I see metal on a building, sometimes it looks nice, but we just wouldn't want the appearance of that fence to be too harsh for the neighbor. So if that's how we feel, it will likely be metal.
Okay. But it will be a solid fence is kind of what I was...
It'll be solid.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you very much for answering my questions.
Okay. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, thanks to everybody involved to avoid outside variances, so to speak. I have no problem with the one being requested, and Councillor Harrison's questions answered some of mine. The only question I have is with regards to the landscape plan, and it happens to be up right now. Somebody must have anticipated my question, and knowing the concerns of the people to the north, is that? Where the parking is, I don't see any vegetation between the parking and the fence. And I'm just wondering if there was a reason for that, or if it would be possible to put another, if those are maple there, just knowing that that was one of their biggest concerns. So I'm not saying it has to be there, I'd just like to have the landscape architect think about it and decide if there should be some vegetation there. Otherwise, I'm really happy with the plan, and as I said, I have no problem with the variance, but I know that that was a concern, was losing those trees, so perhaps one of them can be replaced. Okay. Thank you, and again, thank you for not having us have to deal with outside variances, because this one is very minor and it is internal, and I think that's great. And I have to say, I've driven by there a few times and looked and gone, I wonder when we're getting started. So I think this is a great plan and look forward to it.
Thank you. Councillor Jameson?
Thanks, Your Worship. Thanks, Mark, for your presentation, your overview. My questions, most of them have been answered. But as perhaps you could maybe go over the couple of major concerns that the neighbor to the north had and the neighbor to the sort of southeast had, and then maybe the agreement that you've come up with on the access. Maybe just describe what happened there, because it sounds like it's been solved or at least made a little more amenable.
Yeah, I don't know if you can speak to that agreement. The owners know a little bit more about it specifically.
Okay.
Sort of party to those discussions.
Okay.
Okay. Did you want to actually come up and speak to the mic? Just it helps everybody else to hear.
Yeah, just so.
Give us your name too.
Okay, so I'm one of the applicants, Bob Weimer. I live at 99 Musgrave Road, the Garden Lake. Yeah, the agreement's pretty simple. It's just we agreed to make them the driveway on their property. It's already, there is some room already, but it's not quite wide enough, so all we have to do is widen it out a bit so that they have a driveway on their own property to the property line. And we'll promise to put a fence there for them. And yeah, I think at the property line, it all kind of joins into one That's.
Oh, okay.
We have actually a good agreement about that. I think it's included in the rezoning application accompanied it.
Okay, that's good to hear, because I know that that was a topic of a lot of discussion at our public hearing months ago, and it's good to hear that you were able to sort that out. The variance that applied for is fine with me as well, and I'm really pleased that you've worked with the neighbors and certainly staff, and it looks like a good plan.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor, can I ask, James, that I wanted to, I think the first part of your question was also the neighbors to the north. Yeah, in terms of the site plan, as we know, it's a bit of a regular shape, so there's only so much we could do in terms of how the structures were going to be situated. So of course, that actually really didn't change much from the plan that was presented for rezoning. But in the design of the buildings, I don't know if you can bring up unit B, I guess, it would be in the design, so the elevation, so the next, probably 2 sheets away from, oh, I have to go back, sorry. Yes, that one right there, that's the next, yeah.
That one?
You can see on the side elevation, like the rear elevation where the decks are, it looks like there's a full 3-story building there, but in the side elevation, we purposely set it so the actual mass of the 3rd floor, effectively, because of the walkout basement situation, is set back at least about half the building distance. So in order to minimize the presence of that 3-story structure at facing the property. So just an effort to be there to really
Yeah, that's good, and I appreciate that, because it's a tight, irregularly shaped lot. It's an older established neighborhood, and there'd be, it's a big change there, and I appreciate the fact that you're working with the neighbors and trying to make it as good as possible for everybody, so I'll support the application.
Councillor Lavery?
Yes, thanks, Mayor Cooper, and I'll support it as well, and nice work here. It was going to be a question for staff, but maybe it's in between staff and the applicant here. We had some discussion about preserving options for greenways access, and at what stage are we? Has that discussion started with staff, and what is the applicant's thinking on that?
It has started, and it's come up a few times, and it's certainly come up quite a bit as part of the project team. The owners are willing to look at some kind of right-of-way along that western boundary, which is where the proposed path would be located. However, it seemed premature at this time to be finalizing any of those, just because the alignment of that path, and also it seemed like when speaking with the neighbors that many of the neighbors actually weren't in support of having a path there, so I think it felt, and we were just cautious about what we were going to show in the drawings, and then have everybody else in the public, as well as council and staff, make the owners commit to, only to find out that, in fact, what we are discovering, which is a lot of neighbors don't really want that path there. So we're treading a bit carefully. The owners are willing to look at that, but we're trying to find the best solution that keeps everybody happy there. So I would say that there's probably more discussion and more detail to come out of that, to make sure that we, I think on everyone's parts, we get that right for the locals and people who may be using that.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. Perhaps there's a comment by staff on that, Your Worship. If we could, at this stage, I certainly think that there's owners now, and then there's strata owners down the line here. So I'd like to get the sort of our thinking clear, at least at the stage where we approve it at council.
Development Services?
Your Worship, staff and the Greenways Committee has looked at this site plan and this property. From my understanding, and the good news is 9th Avenue terminates right here. So even if there wasn't a pathway through this corner, there's still access to the property to the west. I think what should happen is the Greenways Committee and the Shuswap Trail Alliance, as our contractor for trails, should go out and determine exactly where that alignment should be on the property, if one is even needed on the property. At this point, I'm not sure if one is needed or not. If one is needed on the property, then I, as the approving officer, could make that a condition for stratification approval.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have anything further for the applicant? Thank you. Thank you for your presentations, and thank you for really trying to accommodate the neighbors in the area. We really appreciate that, and it looks like a very nice design, and I really like how you've taken into, you know, even trying to accommodate them ones on the north there. So thank you for that. So go ahead and have a seat. Do we have any questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, then I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Administrator?
Your worship, the next item, 5.2, is ALC application 376 for the property at 1471 50th Street Southwest. And I have a motion moved by Councillor Eliason, seconded by Councillor Harrison, that application number ALC 376 be authorized for submission to the Agricultural Land Commission.
Okay. Development Services?
Your worship, the property is located on 50th Street Southwest. It's owned by Daryl and Arlene McLeod. It's just under 10 acres in size. It was subdivided back in 2006 from the remainder portion of the property, which is to the west. And during the subdivision of the property, when the ALC approved it, they required a covenant to be placed on the title, saying that the only spot you can build a house is in this area outlined in red. And that area happens to be on quite a steep slope, which you can see on these photos here. The treed area of the property is a slope of at least 30%. It drops more than 15 meters from Christensen Road down to the field area. And it would be tough to build on that portion of the property. In addition to that, the access would have to be expanded along the field over a pond area, and thus cutting into the agricultural land on the property. And so the applicant is proposing to have that covenant discharged and have a new covenant put on, saying that the building site can be more or less in the middle of the property, 20 meters by 20 meters, 400 meter square site next to the barn. And this portion of the property is up on a little bit of a knoll, and it's much more suitable for a house. The ALC required the covenant, not the city, not the city's approving officer at that time. And this is the second type of application that we've seen in recent times, I think ever. In the past, the ALC has dealt with these requests, but they've brought local governments into the equation to get their opinion. And if council approves it, then the application would go to the ALC. If they don't approve it, then it stops right here. Staff support the proposal, and the Agricultural Advisory Committee supports the proposal. And the applicant agent, Joe Johnson, is here.
Mr. Johnson, did you want to come forward and speak? Welcome to council.
Good morning, Joe Johnson, 5460 40th Avenue Northwest. Good morning, Your Worship, councilors. I'll be brief, just a couple of things. As always, staff has done a great job putting the report together, and has sort of stolen my thunder. But the fact is there'll be a net reduction in use of agricultural land if the ALC allows this covenant to be moved. The driveway will be half as long, and so there'll be more farmland left over. I'd just like to comment on the other application that was turned down, which was up by, I think it's 16th Avenue Southwest. A couple of things there. The ALC didn't give us an opportunity for a site meeting, and I think if they had visited the site, their decision might have been different. We've requested a site meeting, and this specifically requested a site meeting, just so we can show the commission the situation and how things will be improved. So I don't think Daryl and close to 5,000 square foot house. I think it's just an area where they can choose to put their house. It's kind of a retirement home for him and Arlene, so that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll just see if council has any questions, but thank you for your presentation. I think anytime we can save some farmland, then that's always a good thing, right? So I will open it up to council. Do you have any questions for Mr. Johnson? Seeing none, go ahead and have a seat. And, oh, sorry, Councillor Lyson?
Yeah, no, just comments. I'll support this to move forward, but seeing that the ALC has implemented that covenant and what they've done with it and what they've done recently, they may say no way. That's my expectation anyways, but I'm happy to move it forward. Their mandate is preservation of farmland, and giving the only thing I think that this has as an advantage over the last one was that this decision was made in 05, 06 as opposed to more recently. So good luck, but I expect a weird road access to be requested from Christensen Road on a hairpin.
Thank you. Councillor Lavery?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Cooper. So I get this is a unique piece of land, and it'll be interesting to see what the decision of the ALC is. So I will vote to move it forward. I do want to make some other comments, and this is not to Mr. Johnson, but this is to the wording of the applicant in their application. And I can distinguish between the decision in front of us, which is a recommendation to the ALC, versus that reading. But I just want to go on record here and saying, at a minimum, the language used in that letter of application, which is a public document, is actually not only not helpful, at a minimum, but I find it personally unacceptable. And in my perspective here, this is a legal procedure. And my own personal vote about this, not on the ALC part, but about the whole application, is to support that application. And I do not support portions of the wording in here. I'm not sure if the owner recognizes that this process is a legislative process. The wording does not fly, at least with me. And I think the applicant needs to distinguish between the ALC matter and extraneous punditry that is not appropriate. Your Worship, I just quickly asked staff, maybe I should have asked that a little later, is it possible to not impede this process with the applicant editing and rewording their application for consideration at council?
Development Services?
Your Worship, this application has been filed with the ALC. It's gone to their portal, their electronic portal, so it's in the ALC's domain. So it would be up to the applicant to make that decision.
So just thank you for that, Your Worship. And so to be clear, I will give due consideration to the ALC matter, and I'm more than inclined to support it. My personal recommendation is that the owner submit an updated version to council when we come forward here, perhaps with a cleaned up version. If that comes forward, I will each and every time, if it comes forward unedited, or I will make a motion to defer until appropriate wording happens. I may be in a minority here. I don't want to impede, and again, I want to distinguish between making a decision on a legal process of an ALC motion versus the wording. And in some ways, perhaps, the implication of the wording is up to the applicant, but I do view that my vote to support it also supports that wording, and I'm not going there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you, Worship. I will vote in support of moving this forward. I feel that the fact pattern is different than the other situation that was turned down. I don't want to propose to tell Mr. Johnson how to do his job, but obviously the focus needs to be on the fact that you can't build on that, or it's very difficult to build on the back piece, and the net gain is really the key that I think the ALC may focus on in agricultural land. I'm not sure they will support it, but I think if we support it here, it has a better chance of passing. So I do vote in favor. I do concur with Councillor Lavery's comments, though. I'm not sure how to say it, but the letter is somewhat inflammatory, and I think it would be better if it was reworded, so. But I will vote in support.
Thank you. Did you have something you wanted to say, or you're just noting? Oh.
I'd just like to mention that I will be contacting my client and asking him to retract parts of his letter.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Councillor Harrison?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Can we just look at Appendix 3? I just want to make sure I understand how the covenant came about. So staff had said that this piece was connected to the west piece. Can you just put your hand on that part? Okay, so that part was a part of this parcel. And is that part in the agricultural land reserve where that house is?
Your Worship, this is actually, okay, so this is the remainder. It's a separate parcel of land now that was subdivided in 2006. And it is in the ALR, this portion up on top of the knoll. Actually, it's more than a knoll, but up on the bank here. And it's in the ALR, and it's designated acreage reserve in the OCP. And it's west of the Salmon River, which supports subdivision. Whereas this portion of the property, of the new property, and the property under application is all in the Salmon Valley designation, including the bank.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I wondered because that west portion, like when you go up and take a look, it doesn't look like you could grow anything on it. So that's why I wanted to know if it was an agricultural land reserve. So when my second question is the owner who subdivided it, is that the person who built that house on the west property?
I don't know, Your Worship.
Okay. So when the property was subdivided, the ALC then put the covenant on and said, okay, if you're going to build a house in the remaining piece, it has to be on that west end where the bank is.
That's right. The ALC wants the house built in the red area here.
Okay. Did they also state where the access to that house had to be or not?
Not the ALC, but the city required a covenant to be put on saying no access from Christensen Road. Basically, if you drive up to here, right before the bend, you can see how steep it is and how unsuitable it is for an access egress at that point. So that's the reason for the covenant there. So if a house was built on where the ALC wants it to go, then the driveway would have to be extended through the farm field and over this water course.
Yeah, I went up and took a look at that off of Christensen Road, so I can see why the city would put that covenant on there, because you can't have a driveway there. It's almost straight down. So I know Mr. Johnson is obviously aware of this, but that certainly, I think, adds to the argument, and I'm sure that's why you want a site visit, because you're going to have to double the driveway. And in fact, the driveway that's there already accesses that barn, and so really you're not by putting the house there, you're not losing any farmland because the street's already there. Okay, so I think I fully understand it. I will support the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you for the second time, and I think Councillor Harrison really dealt with my question. I guess my only other thought was, is there, with that water course, is there further issues that aren't ALC but are riparian that won't allow that road all the way to the house site that the ALC wanted originally? Is there riparian issues, and is that further, I mean, even if there isn't, I'm sure that the report can, or the site visit can make it very clear that there could be. Does that help the application in any way, shape, or form to stay away from that water course?
Development Services?
Your Worship, I'm not positive if this water course would be subject to the riparian area regulations or not. And if it is, then as far as I'm concerned, it would be the province that would have a say in that.
Okay.
And that the owner would be responsible for finding out if they can build a road over there, and the city would not get involved with that.
So, okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anything further from council? Councillor Harrison?
Just one more question, Your Worship, through you to staff. To me, a site visit's really necessary, and obviously on the last application up Glen Eden, there wasn't a site visit, because if you look at this without going to the site, you probably aren't going to support it. Is there anything that the city can do on our end to encourage the Agricultural Land Commission to make sure they visit the site? Like, can we add something to the motion, or is there something we can do online?
Development Services?
Your Worship, probably add something to the motion would probably be best, just like council did for the South Canoe School.
Right. Okay, I would make an amendment then, or propose an amendment to our motion to include, and the City of Salmon Arm recommends that the Agricultural Land Commission have an on-site visit so that all aspects of the application can be considered.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Flynn. So this is amendment. Does anybody want to speak to the amendment? Councillor Jameson?
Thanks for that, Councillor Harrison, because that was next on my, I had my button pushed for that. And, I'll certainly support the amendment and the application. And I'll have some comments
Okay.
when we're ready to vote.
All right. So just speaking to the amendment, I'll call the question on the amendment. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. The amendment is carried. So the motion as amended. Would anyone like to speak to that? Councillor Jameson?
Thanks, Your Worship, and it was interesting to listen to the discussion that was going on here. It was very similar to what we had at the Agricultural Advisory Committee, and some of the questions were raised. Unfortunately, that day we didn't have a quorum. The feeling was, though, that it's a solid application and that we could support it, and for all the reasons that Council has suggested here and that Mr. Johnson has put in his report. It's a really difficult place to build a house on that coveted area. It's almost impossible without, well, it is impossible without having the driveway go down to 50th. And so we have this landlocked piece of agricultural land that has become virtually useless. So moving a site to the middle of the property makes good sense. A short driveway to the north and then cutting that whole length in half really does make a lot of sense. So I'm glad that Councillor Harrison made that motion and that we can invite the commissioners out here to have a look, because I think that once they see it, they'll agree. I'm hoping they will.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Flynn?
Thank you. I will vote in support of the amended motion.
Is there anything further? Councillor Jameson?
There was one piece that was spoken about by the owners, and the pond. The pond is, in his estimation, has really developed in the last 5 years. The pond to the north has been there for a long time, but the pond that develops on his property is seasonal, and it's really been over the last 5 years. He said that it's been collecting water. It's probably coming from the west down the mountain. So it's doubtful that it's riparian. However, you'll notice that there's a ditch, a drainage ditch. And if that connects to the river in some way, there might be questions asked, okay? Those aren't our questions to ask.
Thank you, Councillor Jameson. Do we have anything further? Then I will call the question on the motion as amended. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Administrator?
Your Worship, I believe there was a late item added.
Yes. So it was to do with the wildfire protection plan, and Councillor Jameson and I met with staff and our Director of Corporate Services made a phone call to the person who would be in charge of that application. Is that correct?
The UBCM program manager.
in charge of that, so she did that. We also met with Nisqually Indian Band on that and on another issue as well. So Councillor Jameson was going to write this all up for the next council meeting, but we might as well. Did you have a question, Councillor Flynn?
I can wait till Councillor Jameson.
Okay. Councillor Jameson?
Good, thanks, Your Worship. Further to the questions that were put to yourself and me about 2 weeks ago, so I have met with a rep from NIB 4 times on the 4th, the 5th of July, the 27th, and the 31st. And those included, on the 27th, the entire council band. And so we discussed it thoroughly. So one of the challenges that we have with this application is we don't know what we're applying for, even now. And it's difficult to say, to recommend anything. I'm leaning towards an individual application by the city without overlapping application with NIB. And the reason for that is some information came through the ministry, through Ms. Jackson, that suggests that we keep the application separate and that we reference and overlap in some ways, but make them separate, and that we are committed to working together. Right now, we don't know what we're applying for. Okay, so to have a RFP drawn up at this time wouldn't make a lot of sense until we can get a clearer picture of what's being offered. It's on the agenda for NIB. They want something like this for their people, and they have hired Mr. Smith, so he has a contractual relationship with them. And our suggestion anyway through staff is we could work with NIB in some way without any kind of legal implications to our relationship with Mr. Smith or NIB. So at this point, I'm leaning towards an individual application, and if that is what council would like, I suggest that we move with that. And I'm suggesting until we know more and that the ministry is willing to, or pardon me, not willing, recommending that we have a joint application, then I would go the single route. So that's what we've done so far. I met only once with Mr. Smith. I've had a call in for him, and I haven't talked to him for the past week, so I don't know what his take was on it, because the NIB was going to have him call me, and he hasn't done that yet. So
I wonder if we could just, Aaron, could you just give us a bit of a rundown on what your conversation was with the official that you spoke to from the UBCM?
Thank you, Your Worship. So I had a conversation with the program manager who oversaw the previous version of the strategic wildfire prevention plan, and he urged us not to do anything at this moment without actually having an idea of what the new program would look like. He also said that it would be wise to consider having separate applications that reference each other, because we have different jurisdictions and different resources, but certainly working together is a positive thing. And he really was hesitant on giving much further detail, but did say that it looked very good for local governments who had previous concerns about dealing with lands outside of the boundaries and crown lands. So a lot more focus on local government lands moving forward.
He also did say that we wouldn't know, it would be revealed at the UBCM as to what the application may look like, or what the details we should reference in an application. Is that correct?
Yes, he didn't give any details on any preliminary work that we should be doing. In fact, he discouraged any action prior to that announcement. And it isn't public when that actually is going to be announced, but he did say that it was likely going to be at UBCM.
Okay, thank you. Did you have anything further, Councillor Jameson?
yes, I think one of the best meetings we had, though, was when we were able to meet with the fire chief and Mr. Noonhausen and Ms. Jackson. And Carl thank you. He had the maps made up, and they had already made good reference on the maps as to where public assets are that need to be protected. And so that's an important start, you know. And as Mr. Neunhausen says, number one is water. We have to protect our water sites and our water delivery systems. And so that's a start. And that would be something that we would look at, and I would suggest anyway that we'd look at when we, if we hire a consultant and have an RFP sent out to get the consultant, is to what assets do we protect? What's the most important?
So we have that map, which is excellent. Okay. So anything further, Councillor Jameson?
I'm open to questions, and I suspect you are too. So
Yes, absolutely. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Worship. My question is to the CAO, and with regards to the big picture discussions, Foresight, Onsite, Silvatech are all clients of mine for benefit programs. If the First Nations is choosing who would do the RFP, am I able to be involved in the general discussion about this issue, but not obviously voting on the RFP if the only people that apply are all clients of mine? Or should I be stepping out for even the general discussion?
Through your worship, I don't believe Councillor Flynn needs to step out at this point, only when it comes to awarding a contract.
Okay, thank you. Then thank you for the update. I guess my one comment would be, it sounds like the recommendation is to wait, and then the second recommendation is to do this alone. My support for this was partly based on trying to develop partnerships with our First Nations partners and move forward for employment opportunities for them and for their opportunities to do some of the work if there is work done. So I'm not sure how I feel about doing it separately. I know it's referencing each other's applications, but to me it was more about working together. And I feel a bit like doing anything is needle in a haystack, or it's such an overwhelming issue that even doing a little bit doesn't make a ton of sense, except protecting those assets. So I'd sure like to see more information on that in the future. Our water assets, I can understand that. But otherwise, I just think it's just such a difficult issue to deal with, and I can't imagine what the cost would be to do it in any effective manner. So I will wait to hear how we move forward. Appreciate the update, but to say I'm skeptical is probably the best summary of my thoughts.
Thank you. And one of the things, though, they said too, if we do it separately and reference each other, it helps with the whole financial piece about who pays for what. And there will be a different pot of money, I understand, for First Nations and a different than there is for communities. So that was another big part of it. But the working together, I think that's what we all want, and referencing each other, if that's the way that it's supposed to go, that's what they would like us to do, then that's we certainly want to do that. So I appreciate the comments, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Lavery?
Yes, thank you. And thanks for the update. They really actually are helpful. I think that, at least from my perspective, there was no intent of getting granular with an application that we don't really know. It was more, we have the relationships, but positioning our discussion about where to go at a high level. It sounds like that's happening, so I want to thank our First Nation liaisons for that. I think the issue of co-application, co-support, there's no doubt in the past that support from Aboriginal communities were a key factor in application, and so a co-support of each other's I think would be helpful, and I'm encouraged to see that at least at this stage now it's on the table with our First Nation partners, and we've got a pulse on it, so thank you very much.
We also I'd like to see the report still at council meetings so that it can be referenced. I know that there's people in the community that are wondering what's happening, so we need to make sure that they know. And also we did talk about Trans-Canada Highway improvements, and there's some information we have there, but I also see it looks like we're going to be put off to 2019 anyway. So Right, Councillor Jameson?
Yes, a couple responses. The cost for some of the prescription in some places is overwhelming. That's, I mean, we've heard that word a couple of times, both from our own senior staff and from the Rap Attack people who came and spoke to us a few months ago. And I think, I'm not sure, I think it was Councillor Lavery sent this out a few months ago, and Cranbrook suggests it would cost them $28 million. So Cranbrook is approximately the size of Salmon Arm in population. Area, I'm not sure. Regardless, though, that's a lot of money. So I think even if it is a small amount of money and if we can get started, it's something that we can build on. And it's something that I think is going to take much more than the city. It's going to take the provincial government as well. It's going to take the people in Salmon Arm to do their part. And I think we need to mobilize some sort of a much larger community effort and not leave it all up to the city, because it can be done, but that's our entire budget. $28 million, we couldn't do it. And so I think we have to spend what little money may come forward as wisely as possible. And the other thing, just getting back to what Councillor Flynn was saying about cooperation, even if we did do separate applications, it wouldn't exclude the opportunity to actually hire NIB people.
That's right.
And so there's possibilities there, and if we can work together, like at the staff level and the political level, to reference and to overlap, I think that's part of what we can do anyway. It's maybe not perfect, but it's part of what we can do.
I don't know about any of you that have big trees in your yard, so too. We clean under them every year, and every year we take out a ton of stuff. Every time there's a big windstorm, there's branches down, so it's a tough job, and you can we could spend millions and millions of dollars cleaning up absolutely everything, and then turn around in 2 years and have to do it again. So, is there anything further? Administrator?
Your Worship, I have a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Eliason, second by Councillor Jameson, that the Development and Planning Services Committee meeting of August 7, 2018 be adjourned.
All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried.
Is our next month?